Unless you've been chilling in a cave on the moon with a bucket on your head for the past few weeks, you'll probably know that Wars Battlefront 2 has been the subject of a lot of conversation recently. Not exactly the kind of conversation EA were probably expecting either, as the internet has practically decided to wage war with them, and for good reason too. They decided to do something really shifty, and that's really rubbed people up the wrong way. So gamers have stood up to them like the Rebel Alliance themselves and said, "We're not standing for this crap and our voices will be heard." And if Reddit's anything to go by, those voices were definitely heard, loud and clear. But just in case you have been chilling in a cave on the moon with a bucket on your head for the past few weeks, basically what happened is microtransactions happened. And not just any old microtransactions either, but some really nasty gameplay altering microtransactions in the form of loot boxes. But more importantly, stuff which changes in-game stats that can be unlocked through normal gameplay, but it's just going to take a very long time. This is the main structure of the progression system in Battlefront 2. The thing that's supposed to make you feel as though you're being rewarded for playing. And the original idea was if you pay for those loot boxes, you can bypass the whole playing of the game, which completely contradicts the system being implemented to reward gamers as they play, and instead favours those who pay their way to victory, avoiding the grind, and get those upgraded star cards much sooner than everybody else. Which doesn't exactly sound like a sense of accomplishment, if you ask me. It doesn't help that some of the heroes were also locked behind some really grindy paywalls too, which is just another kick in the balls for the consumer. And so this pissed off the community even more. So much so, that the backlash caused EA to reverse said practices and basically temporarily remove all of those microtransactions, along with making those heroes a lot more accessible. Something which they should have been right from the start. What we're left with, now most of the dust has settled, is quite possibly the worst progression system I have ever seen in a fully priced game. And I'm not kidding, there's literally single player games out there from years ago which had multiplayer tacked onto them that have better progression systems than Wars Battlefront 2 in its current state. But before I start going on about just how terrible it really is, I just want to take a pause from all the angry ranty stuff and actually give a bit of credit where it's due. From my experience, Wars Battlefront 2 actually functions as a really fun, addictive and just generally great game. It's a massive improvement from the 2015 title, and it's such a huge shame to have something like microtransactions completely destroy its reputation, as all of the developers involved in making it have done a great job, and created a really immersive, enjoyable Star Wars experience. Which makes talking about it in such a negative way a really hard thing to do. Unlike a lot of people on the World Wide Web, I actually want the game to succeed, and I want Wars Battlefront 2 to be a game worth coming back to further down the line. But there's still things that are quite concerning. And it's honestly difficult to see any sort of long-term playability if these issues aren't addressed at some point soon. At least from my perspective anyway. Now, even though it's not pay to win anymore, not at the moment anyway, EA have already done the damage and left a pretty bad taste in everyone's mouths. But the worst thing is, we're still left with the empty shell of EA's failed microtransaction riddle plan, the lootbox system, which is the bread and butter to making Wars Battlefront 2 tick. One thing that was done right was the way that weapons and attachments are unlocked, which are all tied into getting kills whilst using specific guns and classes. So if you want to unlock a new gun for, let's just say the assault class, then you'll need to get a certain number of kills with that class. And then if you want to unlock attachments for that gun, then you'll just have to play with it and be rewarded as you do so, just like in a lot of other games like Battlefield 3 and 4 for example. Although this system isn't exactly the most interesting way of unlocking stuff in online multiplayer games, it's a tried and tested progression system that works, which does link the reward with the player's actions. The more you use a class, the more you'll be rewarded with stuff to use for that class. Simple. But the way that star cards are handled is a lot more confusing and annoying, as you'll have to grind matches to gain credits, which can then be used to buy loot boxes, which can then be opened to gain access to loot drops, usually useless crap that you don't really want, and sometimes you'll earn crafting parts instead, which can be used to upgrade the star card to the next level, but only when you've reached a certain rank for the class you're currently using it on, which can only be done by owning more star cards. So basically, instead of being rewarded for your actions such as leveling up classes or using star cards, like you'd probably see in other shooter games, you're essentially playing a card collecting game, where the focus is on trying to get as many star cards as you can in order to unlock the ones you want to upgrade, which is just a bit dumb. This is just an example of how disjointed this system is from the actual gameplay, and because the fact that loot boxes are just so random, it's very rare that you'll ever get something that you want for the class of your choice, meaning that having to craft cards and upgrades is, in most cases, the only way you'll ever get the desired loadout of your choice. And because accumulating crafting parts is a really slow process, it just makes progressing in Battlefront 2 a bloody frustrating thing to try and do. especially when there's so much other stuff like emotes and pointless endgame poses thrown into the mix too. Now, although the loot boxes are the main cause for concern here, there's a lot of other games out there that have managed to successfully generate revenue from them, without tying them directly into the progression system itself. Overwatch is a great example of how to do this right. The loot boxes in Overwatch don't affect any statistical stuff, and only give players cosmetic items that aren't connected to gameplay. And it just goes to show you that if you make a game worth playing, people will be prepared to lay down more cash on it, even if it's all only cosmetic stuff. The fact that Star Wars Battlefront 2 is getting a load of free DLC further down the line basically gives players more of an excuse to come back and fork out for those loot boxes, keeping the cash flow going and filling the void that's missing from the choice of cutting out the season pass or paid DLC. And if the loot box system was to feature cosmetic items only, this would be a consumer-friendly way to monetize the game without EA and all of the other companies that surround the creation of Star Wars Battlefront 2 having to put up with the wrath of the internet. As a popular line from the movies, I have a bad feeling about this, as the monetization option for Battlefront 2 has only temporarily been switched off, and could just as easily be turned back on at any time, causing some serious imbalance in the game, and removing the otherwise grindy but fair progression system and flipping it on its head into something a lot worse. Because all of the DLC coming out in the future is supposedly going to be free, there's probably going to be a compromise somewhere, and no doubt the heroes and possibly even the maps might be tied into that awkward progression system too. I really hope not, but there's no reason why they won't be, especially when some of the base heroes and villains require in-game currency to unlock already. And if this was all monetized and those dreaded crystals came back, which is basically what you get to spend on loot boxes if you use real cash, then we might be back at square one, which is a pretty big problem. The last thing we want to do is grind away for 20 hours or pay for a load of loot boxes just to be able to play as someone like General Grievous. I'm pretty sure that would be the final nail in the coffin for Star Wars Battlefront 2. So how exactly should EA deal with this situation? The civil way. The way that respects their fanbase without trying to rinse out their wallets. They should allow for a separate loot box system to be created that focuses only on cosmetic items and spend some time in making in-game items that don't affect gameplay which people will actually want to invest real money on. Cool customization options that fit into the Star Wars universe, those alien heads that we saw in the last title, anything that people will want to have without giving them a statistical advantage over other players. All of the star card stuff and upgrades that directly affect gameplay should be left in an unmonetized state, perhaps even fine-tuned and rebuilt, so that the classes can be ranked up through gameplay instead of by collecting cards. And it could be altered so that the star cards can be upgraded by completing challenges, linked in with the cards themselves, maybe as an alternative to using those in-game crafting options that already exist. I mean, to be completely honest, I'd personally like to see a complete overhaul to the progression system to make it more functional, straightforward, and all tied in with gameplay. If it was up to me, I'd have loot boxes tied to cosmetic items only, classes ranked up through natural gameplay and earning points, like in Battlefield, and all of the star cards and their upgrades unlocked through the credits earned from just playing the game. Those very same credits used to purchase loot boxes in the game's current state. This would probably solve most of the problems caused by the game's progression system right now, and allow the players to build the classes that they want without having to jump through a bunch of hoops first. It might not be the fanciest way to unlock stuff, but at least it makes sense, and doesn't put up any obstacles for the consumer. And this way, there would still be microtransactions in the game, but they won't fuck around with the gameplay, giving EA more of an incentive to create their free DLC in the future, and giving the gamers more of an incentive to come back to Battlefront 2 further along in the game's life cycle, making everybody happy in the process. So I'm going to end this video on a positive note by saying that Star Wars Battlefront 2 is a great game as far as the game element is concerned, but its progression system definitely needs to be improved. And I think this should be a lesson for not just EA but everyone in the gaming industry that you need to be careful not to let greed get the better of your creation, as it can and probably will turn very ugly very quickly. Hopefully Battlefront 2 will be able to stand back up on its own 2 feet over time and recover from its punishing launch, as I think the developers deserve a better reception for all the long hours and hard work that they put into making this otherwise awesome game. The community was definitely right to call EA out on this one to make the game a better place to play, as I could only imagine how bad it could have been if they didn't. But as it stands right now, we should give the developers the benefit of the doubt and provide constructive criticism on how they can right their wrongdoings, instead of dwelling on their game's problems and giving them all a hard time. But if we've learned anything from all of this, if you're a company in the gaming industry, whatever you do, don't do anything dodgy that's going to piss off your fanbase, because it's only going to end badly. But anyway, that's pretty much all I've got to say in this video. I'll probably be covering more on Star Wars Battlefront 2 in the future, and of course Battlefield 1. So come check out my channel and subscribe if you want to see more content. Give me a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll be seeing you in our next episode.